A very warm welcome back to the Vidyashilp Edcast, everyone. Today we have psychology in focus. And we have as a guest with us Dr. Sheetal Lakhani, who is an assistant professor of psychology at the School of Liberal Arts and Design Studies. Sheetal has a PhD from National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS, and has seen over 1,000 people in her practice as a clinical psychologist. She integrates various models of therapy, including cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, and mindfulness in her own practice. And I want to start by curiously asking about your journey, Sheetal. Having been a clinical psychologist this long, what drew you to teaching?
We generally tend to see practice and academics as two separate things in most fields as well. And in clinical psychology, there are models. One being the one I believe in. It's called the scientist practitioner model, where they believe that the practitioner should also be the scientist, and the scientist should also be the practitioner. So it kind of feeds into each other. What you teach comes from what you practice, and what you practice comes from what you teach, and what you research, because I'm also actively into research, comes from the other two elements. So I think it's been very meaningful for me. Even when I was doing my PhD, I was doing some academics teaching. So it's part of our NIMHANS expects you to do research, academics, and practice together. It's part of my MPhil degree as well to do all the three together. So I think it was always going to be like that. That's why I chose PhD. But to square this point up, it's been very meaningful to bring all these areas together. I think when I teach in classes using my practice experience, using the cases that I have seen alive, it makes more sense to me. And as a practitioner, when I repeat and reflect on what I practiced with my students, and they bring amazing insights from their own thinking, that feeds into my practice.
Right. So on that note, a very warm welcome to you on the Edcast, Sheetal. We are very curious to know about your experiences of bringing practice and teaching together, practice, teaching, and research, as you said, together. You've been in the field for so long. How would you say that psychology has evolved in India over this time?
Oh, big time, I think. We've come a very, very long way. And not just India, globally also, we've come a very long way. Actually, I want to start by letting you know that psychology is not even 150 years old. Now, that's a baby. When it comes to sciences, sciences are centuries old. And of course, you can't say there was nothing before 150 years that was psychological. Like there were many philosophy theories, there were many Indian practices, indigenous practices that looked into psychology. But if we are speaking about where it all started, 150 years ago in Germany, from there we've come a long way in various schools of thought being proposed in psychology that go beyond each other. So all of us know about Freud, who spoke about the unconscious mind and sex being an important drive to human behavior. But we've come a long way to say beyond that there are other things. Each school that evolves brings new perspectives. In India, because you were specifically talking about India, mental health awareness to me is the most striking evolution we've made. Mm-hmm. And I'm so happy about that evolution, especially post-COVID. I think we've been able to see the importance of discussing, destigmatizing, and addressing mental health.
Right. Yeah. So that actually brings me to something I've also been thinking about. Hasn't that awareness, that increase in the awareness about mental health, actually changed the way we look at psychology as a career choice now?
Absolutely. The number of requests that we get asking about psychology as a subject, I'm amazed. When I took psychology up as a subject, it was an unconventional, a choice that is risky, a choice that no one knows much about. I was often asked, what is psychology, when I took it up, Mm-hmm. From there, today we've come to, I'm saying, so many people seeking out this subject. It's been very helpful as a society to, evolve into considering psychology as a profession. And today the scope is huge. We are seeing a lot of demand for psychologists as of now.
Right. But then again, psychology touches upon so many areas in life. So shall we also talk about what does psychology offer beyond therapy and mental health? Of course, that's one of the most major aspects of it. And we've seen that grow over the last few years, maybe a decade, especially like you said, after COVID. And of course, now most campuses would have an on-campus counselor, so on and so forth. And like you said, there's lesser and lesser stigma associated with talking to a counselor, lesser and lesser stigma associated with talking about mental health.
Yeah.
To the extent that sometimes we think we're talking about, like, they even may, our students may even use it as an excuse, right? But there is awareness, and which is great, which also makes it a great career choice, and it's great to see this quick evolution.
Yeah.
But then again, psychology for me touches upon so many other areas. It goes beyond mental health, and it
Yeah.
goes beyond therapy. So could we speak about some of those areas?
Absolutely. So human behavior it cuts across everything that we do pretty much. Even if you're talking about newer evolutions in AI and technology, ethics, human behavior, and how human behavior can inform AI as well as how AI can inform psychology, is tremendous scope in that area now. There are projects on digital phenotyping, which means I can just like we have a picture of genes now, and you can get a whole picture of your health. Digital phenotyping can do that with your mental health. So AI is and technology is one area where it's cutting across. But even if you speak of regular daily life as it happens for us, psychology cuts across so many fields. When you speak of COVID, one thing that comes to mind is health. So health and psychology have interacted for very, very long. We also have a subdiscipline called health psychology or psychological medicine, and that looks into very exciting new areas like psychocardiology, psycho-oncology, which speak of the interactions between our mind or mental health and our bodies or our physical health, and how direct or how strong that connection is at times. So there's health. Then there's law, criminal profiling, forensic psychology. All of these intersections are extremely interesting now and picking up very fast. There's sports psychology that's picking up very fast, where psychologists play a role in the performance, analyze the performance, counsel the athletes, and a lot of our students are actually showing interest in that. So, just a few examples to name a few.
Right. Of late, in fact, I came across, I interacted with a few students of psychology in my academic writing course, where in the last module we actually do a discipline-specific reading and writing, where experts from the discipline actually show them papers from that discipline, and students are expected to respond to that. So these experts are showing them how academic writing is carried out within their disciplines.
Wow.
So they kind of connect the academic writing principles and practices that they've been learning with us with writing in their own respective disciplines. And that's where I came across this interesting paper on the impact of, the impact on cognition of our food behaviors and food habits, right? So eating while watching TV, so on and so forth. So there was this paper, very interesting paper on that, and that is something that our students found very, very interesting to deal with. So of course, psychology goes into everyday practices, right? Like something as common as eating while watching TV, and so on and so forth, which gets our students also thinking about all of these little habits that we inculcate.
Yeah, and that's also the fun part about teaching psychology. Like my examples in class are about dating apps and what works in dating apps and attracts mates. It's so relevant to every aspect of life, human behavior, that it's very interesting what you brought up about food behavior. There are interesting researches of about how eating disorders are linked with very childhood events. That were very basic to a person's development.
Right. So what are the kind of intersections? This actually gets me to thinking about the intersections that you spoke about law earlier. You spoke about behaviors earlier. It makes me think about the intersections of psychology with other disciplines that our students are nudged to explore. So what kind of intersections do you think are possible with marketing, let's say, or UI UX design, let's say, which our students are exploring?
Yeah. Oh, yes. It's interesting you bring up marketing and UI, because again, very popular choices these days. So marketing and consumer behavior have known, it's been known that psychology helps us understand why people choose a certain product, what makes them go for it. And UI UX designing does that also. It looks at the user's needs, the user's behaviors to predict what kind of interfaces will be helpful to have in designing. But since you bring up designing, I also want to tell you about an interesting intersection I recently learned about from a structural engineer. So where would you think a structural engineer could have anything to say to a psychologist that would be interesting? But it was. They told me how in Europe they are designing buildings now for mental health or
Right.
for an aspect of mental health. So there are webinars, workshops being held on designing buildings to help tackle the problem of loneliness that is a pandemic now, a known pandemic facing all of us, very relevantly.
Identified by WHO as a pandemic. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So it was so interesting to learn that designing can also take human factors. So there's also human factors designing that is at the intersection of designing and psychology. Very interesting.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. So I'm actually wondering, are there projects around the intersections of psychology with other disciplines here at Vidyashilp University that our students have the chance or opportunity to be exposed to?
Oh yes, definitely. So, for example, one that I know of that Dr. Gargi from psychology and Dr. Jyotsna are planning to work on is on healthcare costing. So they bring together economics and psychology, healthcare costing for mental health or neurological conditions that are chronic. So that I think is very interesting for students to be part of and learn from, because this is an intersection of two major subjects in the liberal arts domain. And then there is one that Miss Spatika Ramanujan from design and I did together an exploration of theatre and its role in psychology. So we picked up a play that had themes of narcissism in it, and we had our students enact the play. And of course the enactors can reflect on what it felt like to be in those shoes, because it's more experiential learning. And the audience also interacted with the actors, and now we are going to take that forward as a pedagogical project in which students are also involved. So there's many such examples actually. This is just one. I think this is the advantage of how we work here as a liberal arts school. The advantage of me walking over to the next cubicle and saying, hey, what is game theory, can you tell me, to a data scientist that's sitting right next to me is amazing. I think we are learning much more than I would have learned in a clinical practice where I was isolated,
Right.
working just with
Right.
clients.
So actually this brings to mind, two thoughts rush to mind on that actually. I was part of that workshop that you spoke about, and I found it very enlightening that, we could, and on the one hand enlightening, but on the other hand also obvious, like we should have always been doing it this way. Like why aren't we always looking at these intersections? My background's in literature, in English literature, and of course literary theory is nothing but drawing from all of these other disciplines like economics, psychology,
Yes.
etc., and then applying it to the text that we are reading. Like you said, a play. So that play was part of my curriculum at some point.
Wow.
And what we do with the curriculum is that we bring ideas of course, like you mentioned earlier, Freud is something that everybody is exposed to reading at some point or the other. So you would read these things from other disciplines. So I would read Karl Marx and apply it to a Charles Dickens. I would read Freud and apply it to a D.H. Lawrence, so on and so forth. So on the one hand, it looks so obvious to me particularly because that's what my training has been. But on the other hand, also so enlightening that we did it in this context, the way you did it with theatre, the play which was enacted actually by students, not just read, but enacted by students who could kind of embody those characters and feel what those characters would be feeling and so on. And the other thing that it also brings to mind is the obviousness of interdisciplinarity. Like we make such a big deal of interdisciplinarity, but finally every study that we do needs to be interdisciplinary if it needs to be holistic, is what I constantly say about how the foundations of the core curriculum are also based and so on and so forth. It feels obvious, but at the same time enlightening.
Yeah, I agree with you that it should not be such a big deal, but I'll also say that it is because maybe your course was taught that way, but I have been taught courses
A
that are
different way.
in silos. Even if I'm working, I'd say, even if I'm doing a PhD from NIMHANS, there are certain things that you that undercut across disciplines within NIMHANS. For example, neurosciences is something that we could interact with, but it doesn't happen so much. We work in silos, so I agree with you that it should be more.
Yeah.
It comes naturally to us that
Yeah. The other thing it brought to mind was also how you were speaking earlier about practice, teaching, and research come together. And you spoke about the projects that faculty in your department in your school have been doing. So I think students being exposed to that research is testimony to the fact that research comes back to the classroom. And
Yes.
finally, research, teaching, and practice are coming together.
Yes.
And I think that there are a certain set of, I mean, we can't pin them down perhaps so easily, but there are a certain set of proficiencies, skills that are needed to be studying the discipline in this way, the way that we try to do it here. And there are also certain skills and proficiencies that are built as a result or are sharpened as a result of the study. So could you shed some light on what proficiencies and skills?
Yeah, I will do that. But just before that, I will also answer or actually respond to what you said about research competences. So, at least a couple of my students have shown their competence built up in their own individual, and not just being part of our projects, but in their own individual presentations and achievements. So, for example, one of our students, Neha, presented a symposium with us, Dr. Gargi and I, and one more senior faculty, on youth mental health, another project that she's working with us on, but her own independent study that she presented with such confidence. Another student of ours, Khushbu Nayak, she presented in Flame University in a conference on neurodivergence, which is such an upcoming important trend and topic in psychology that it was. Yeah, I just had to say that the research
Right.
competences are building and showing in their achievements. To come back to the skills and proficiencies, besides critical thinking, which I think is the basis for any education, sensitivity or awareness of and ability to work with diversity of experiences, thinking differently. This is one, I don't know what you call this skill in technical language, but the ability to be sensitive to other people's minds and empathize with them is one. And the other one, more importantly, is to be able to communicate this empathy. So a lot of the times people come to psychology thinking that they're empathetic, but the communication of empathy is another skill that you have to build, and it takes a long time to do that, especially if it doesn't come very naturally to you. So interpersonal and communication skills is another that comes to mind straight away.
Right, yeah. Interesting that it aligns also with the proficiencies we claim to build in the core, which is thinking and expression, like you said, communicating the empathy, which would include courses like critical thinking and communication skills as well. Humanistic learning, so understanding the self,
Yeah.
and social and cultural awareness, understanding the interpersonal,
Exactly.
the relationships between the self and the others, self and the community, and
Yeah.
so on. Right.
And it pertains to what where the field is going right now.
Right.
We are becoming more inclusive, as psychology is being, I can say, pressured to open up and become more inclusive. So earlier researchers focused, say a lot of researchers came only on studies from men. Now we are including women. Earlier psychology worked in silo, but now studies are involving biological and neuroscience perspectives. So for example, an interesting study showed that your brain changes if you do mindfulness meditation for a certain period of time. And then also, besides biological, incorporating social and cultural forces in studies. So if, for example, I'm working on a project that looks at cultural competence training for mental health clinicians, because if we can't see the culture, just working with the individual may not help. So we are
Absolutely.
becoming more and more inclusive.
Right. Speaking about the field, how do you see it evolving in the next decade? Like, what are we to expect? AI and technology seems to be impacting everything. How is psychology responding to it? How is it changing? How is it adapting? How is it benefiting? What do we expect from this field in the next decade?
Yeah, I think the one word that comes to mind is it's going to be very exciting. As I know, some of my colleagues and how they're interacting with this is with open arms. We are loving the new developments that AI and technology can bring. Of course, some of us worry about our jobs because I've been contacted, for example, by multiple startups or data scientists to help them configure, develop apps or AI platforms that can help do certain parts of even clinical work, say counseling or psychological assessment. So I'm actually very excited to know if we can do that. I'd love to actually see if a machine can replicate some of that for me, because the reason I tell you why I think we are welcoming it with open arms is there's a lack of mental health clinicians that is drastic. The 2016 survey of NIMHANS indicated the treatment gap between how many people need psychological treatment and how many actually are able to get it is 85%.
Okay. Surprising,
need-
actually. Yeah.
Yes, we need all the force that we can. So I think AI is going to help us greatly in doing at least some parts of the job that are repetitive very easily. At the same time, we are going to be able to help technology and AI develop intelligences as we understand the processes of cognition and intelligence in the brain. It's a bi-directional relationship that I think will be fruitful in the future.
That 85% somehow begs the question, how huge is this divide between people with access? Because when you look around us, we feel that, there will be an on-campus counselor, of course, in the institutions that we know of, that we've studied in, that we teach in, and so on. But at the same time, that figure is at 85%, right?
Yeah.
So how huge must be the divide, the gap between people with the privilege of access to
Yeah.
mental health facilities and with people deprived of those
Yes.
facilities.
Which is why I said the pressure is on the field, the responsibility is on us to become more and more inclusive. There have been statements released by multiple associations about, focus on underrepresented communities. But I also want to highlight another thing here, Neha, that you bring up with this treatment gap is the scope. There is immense scope for people to contribute to. I have turned down, in the last few years, I have turned down more patients than I would have or wanted to, because of the lack of time and resources. So I think there's a call for many more people to join the profession and do something to
Right.
tackle this crisis. 1 in 3 students now might have a mental health issue. Does that, again, another statistic that I just cannot shake off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You also did some work, Sheetal, with the Indian Navy. If you could just recollect some of that for us, it would be interesting.
That was my first job after completing my training, which meant I was also learning a lot of things as I went along, and it was really interesting because the context, and that's what we've been talking about, in this entire podcast. The context also affects mental health. So there, the mental health presentations were very different from what I had seen during my training, which was, the civilian context. Very interesting, learnings from that time of work. Yeah. The one thing I noticed is at that time that it doesn't have to be a profile that is more vulnerable to mental health illnesses. I mean, of course, there is, if you speak of it scientifically, but I had seen all kinds of people, senior, junior, appearing to be very strong, appearing to be, the most confident, women, children. I mean, I was amazed by the breadth of what I saw there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So just how, this was just reflecting on that gap again, right?
Yes.
There are communities and, regions, sets of people with a certain access, a privilege of access to mental health facilities, people entirely deprived of it. And then the armed forces with access of a different kind and in need of a service of a different kind as well, slightly different kind as well. So the vast scope of the discipline in terms of what it can do and where it can go.
Oh, yes. So there's military psychology. That's another subfield coming up on its own. taking shape, and I think they're finding different things. Exactly what you're saying about that needs a totally different perspective to human minds, because there the context
is so different. Yeah. And sports psychology, as you
Yes.
mentioned, also coming up in such a big way. We were speaking about aviation earlier, right? And we were speaking, and you were mentioning that at some point we actually might want to do a mental health assessment even for people.
Fitness to fly.
Fitness to fly, for example. We've recently seen so many cases of people. I mean, it's not always physical health, but perhaps physical health factors exacerbated by certain mental health factors, I would say. But yeah, I mean, there have been so many cases of people having a heart attack or a panic attack or something or the other as flyers. And I mean, of course, we already have this for pilots to some extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it may at some point extend to flyers and so on and so
Yes.
forth. So the various ways and directions and regions where this field can grow into is surprising. I mean, not surprising, but yeah, exciting.
Yes.
And enlightening and exciting. Actually.
Yes, absolutely.
So, just to wrap up, what kind of skills, like for a prospective student wanting to join psychology as a program today, with all the developments and possible developments in the next decade that we spoke about, what kind of skills should a student bring to the discipline? Like, who is the ideal student? Is there an ideal student? What kind of skills do they bring to the discipline to really prosper?
That's an excellent question, and one that I've not thought about. So I'll think out aloud. But because of how vast psychology is, I don't think there's one right answer. So I was just reflecting on how I said interpersonal communication skills are extremely important for us. But I can imagine a psychologist who's a researcher, who might be more analytical, can do really well at that, and may not need the other set of skills so much. The interpersonal communication one. So I think based on the person's curiosities, based on their existing interests and aptitudes, one could think about which subdomain of psychology suits them better, instead of saying that there's one ideal student for psychology in general. If you're thinking of clinical psychology, like I said, interpersonal communication skills, empathy, and some amount of resilience, because it can be tough.
Right. Yeah. So on that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Sheetal. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.